I need to tell you something that might completely change how you see your biggest failures and setbacks. 3 months ago, I was coaching a successful entrepreneur who kept mysteriously failing right before major breakthroughs. He'd land huge deals, then somehow mess them up. He'd build incredible momentum, then suddenly burn it all down. On paper, he was doing everything right, but something invisible was sabotaging his success at every turn. That's when I introduced him to Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, and what we discovered was absolutely mind-blowing. His unconscious mind was literally working against his conscious goals, and he had no idea it was happening. Within 6 weeks of identifying and working with his shadow patterns, he broke through to the biggest success of his career. Here's what Jung discovered that will shock you. Your shadow isn't just your dark side or negative traits. It's actually the part of your psyche that holds all the aspects of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or been taught to hide. And when these rejected parts don't get acknowledged, they don't disappear. They go underground and start sabotaging your success in ways that seem completely mysterious and unstoppable. Today, I'm going to reveal the 5 most common shadow signs that are secretly destroying your success, and more importantly, how to recognize when your own shadow is running the show. Because once you understand what your shadow is doing behind the scenes, you'll never feel confused about your self-sabotage. But first, let me explain why this is happening to you right now. Jung spent over 6 decades studying the human psyche, and he discovered something that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Your shadow forms in childhood when you learn which parts of yourself are acceptable and which parts need to be hidden to receive love and approval. Maybe you were told you were too much when you expressed excitement, so you learned to dim your light. Maybe you were punished for being angry, so you pushed down your healthy assertiveness. Maybe you were shamed for wanting attention, so you learned to hide your natural desire to be seen and recognized. All of these rejected parts don't disappear. They become your shadow, and they've been quietly sabotaging your success ever since. What makes this particularly insidious is that shadow sabotage doesn't look like sabotage. It looks like bad luck, poor timing, or mysterious failures that you can't explain. Your conscious mind wants success, but your shadow believes that success isn't safe, isn't deserved, or will lead to rejection and abandonment. Shadow sign number 1. Success panic, and the fear of being seen. The first shadow sign is what I call success panic, and it's probably the most common form of shadow sabotage I see. This happens when you start achieving the success you consciously want, but instead of feeling excited and proud, you feel terrified, overwhelmed, or like you want to disappear. Let me tell you about Sarah, a brilliant marketing consultant who came to me because she kept sabotaging herself right before major victories. She'd pitch to dream clients, land the meetings, impress everyone with her ideas, then mysteriously withdraw her proposals or price herself out of the deal. She couldn't understand why she kept doing this when she consciously wanted these opportunities. When we explored her shadow, we discovered that Sarah had learned as a child that being successful or standing out led to jealousy and attacks from others. Her mother had consistently diminished Sarah's achievements and made her feel guilty for excelling. Sarah's shadow had learned that success equals danger, so every time she got close to real achievement, her shadow would activate panic and force her to retreat to safety. The shadow creates success panic because it's trying to protect you from what it learned was dangerous in childhood. If you were shamed for outshining others, criticized for being too big for your britches, or made to feel guilty for your natural talents, your shadow learned that visibility and success lead to pain and rejection. Here's how to recognize success panic in your own life. Pay attention to what happens in your body and emotions when opportunities arise. Do you feel excited and energized? Or do you feel anxious, overwhelmed, or like you want to hide? Do you find yourself procrastinating on important opportunities? Or making mysterious mistakes right before breakthroughs? Success panic often manifests as sudden illness before important presentations, computer crashes before deadline submissions, or picking fights with important people right before major opportunities. Your shadow is essentially hitting the emergency brake because it believes success will lead to abandonment or attack. The shadow also creates what Jung called imposter syndrome on steroids. This isn't just feeling like you don't deserve success. This is a deep, unconscious terror that if people really see your full power and capability, they'll reject you, abandon you, or attack you. So your shadow keeps you small and hidden to keep you safe. If you recognize this pattern, the first step is acknowledging that your shadow is trying to protect you, not hurt you. Your shadow learned these protective strategies when you were young and vulnerable, and they probably saved you from real emotional pain at the time. But now these same strategies are preventing you from achieving the success you consciously desire. Sarah's breakthrough came when she started thanking her shadow for trying to protect her while also reassuring it that she was now strong enough to handle both success and any criticism that might come with it. She practiced visualizing herself successful and celebrated, and gradually her shadow began to trust that visibility could be safe. Sign number 2, self-worth sabotage and the unworthiness complex. The second shadow sign is self-worth sabotage. And this one is particularly heartbreaking because it often affects the most talented and capable people. This happens when your shadow carries deep beliefs that you're fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or don't deserve good things in life. Jung discovered that many people carry what he called an unworthiness complex in their shadow. This isn't just low self-esteem that you're aware of. This is a deep, unconscious conviction that you're somehow defective or undeserving, and it operates below the level of conscious awareness to ensure that you never achieve more than you deserve. Let me share the story of Marcus, an incredibly gifted artist who kept sabotaging every opportunity for recognition and financial success. He'd create beautiful work, get offers from galleries, then mysteriously destroy the pieces or miss important deadlines. He'd be invited to shows, then not show up. He'd price his work so low that no one took it seriously, or so high that no one could afford it. When we explored his shadow, we discovered that Marcus had grown up with a father who constantly told him he was worthless and would never amount to anything. His mother, trying to be supportive, would say things like, "You're so talented, but talent doesn't pay the bills," or "Don't get your hopes up. Life is hard for people like us." Marcus's shadow had internalized these messages and created an unconscious belief system that went something like this: I'm fundamentally flawed and unworthy of success. If I achieve too much, I'll be exposed as the fraud I really am. It's safer to fail on purpose than to try my best and be rejected. Self-worth sabotage shows up in countless ways. You might consistently undercharge for your services because you don't believe you're worth premium prices. You might not apply for opportunities you're qualified for because you assume you'll be rejected. You might surround yourself with people who diminish your achievements or make you feel small because that feels familiar and safe. One of the most insidious forms of self-worth sabotage is what I call reverse grandiosity. This is when your shadow convinces you that wanting success or recognition makes you selfish, narcissistic, or somehow morally inferior. Your shadow would rather keep you humble and struggling and risk you becoming someone it perceives as arrogant. Or self-important. Jung found that people with unworthiness complexes often become overgivers and people-pleasers as a way to earn the love and approval they don't believe they naturally deserve. They'll work twice as hard for half the recognition, give away their best ideas for free, or sacrifice their own needs to make others comfortable. The shadow logic goes like this: if I can just be good enough, helpful enough, selfless enough, maybe I'll finally deserve love and success. But because the unworthiness lives in the shadow, no amount of external achievement or approval can heal it. The shadow will always find new reasons why you don't deserve what you've achieved. Here's how to recognize self-worth sabotage in your own life. Notice your internal dialogue when good things happen. Do you immediately think about how you don't deserve it, how it won't last, or how you somehow tricked people into giving you opportunities? Do you feel guilty when you succeed, or worry that your success is taking something away from someone more deserving? Pay attention to your pricing, boundaries, and standards. Do you consistently undervalue yourself? Do you accept treatment that you wouldn't tolerate others receiving? Do you feel uncomfortable receiving praise or gifts without immediately deflecting or reciprocating? Marcus's transformation began when he started treating his shadow's unworthiness beliefs like a frightened child who needed reassurance rather than a voice of truth. He practiced receiving compliments without deflecting, charged appropriately for his work, and gradually built evidence that he was worthy of success and recognition. Shadow sign number 3, relationship sabotage and the fear of intimacy, the third shadow. Sign affects your professional relationships and networking in ways that can completely derail your career success. This is relationship sabotage, driven by shadow fears of intimacy, vulnerability, and real connection. Jung discovered that many people carry deep fears in their shadow about being truly known and seen by others. These fears often stem from early experiences of betrayal, abandonment, or emotional invalidation. The shadow learns that letting people get close leads to pain, so it develops sophisticated strategies to keep others at a safe distance. In professional contexts, this shows up as mysterious conflicts with mentors, collaborators, and supporters right when you need them most. You might find yourself picking fights with people who are trying to help you, becoming suddenly cold and distant with potential business partners, or creating drama that destroys promising professional relationships. Let me tell you about David, a talented software developer who kept sabotaging relationships with mentors and potential business partners. Every time someone wanted to invest in his ideas or take him under their wing, he'd become suspicious, argumentative, and eventually push them away. He'd convince himself they had ulterior motives or didn't really understand his vision. When we explored his shadow, we discovered that David had been abandoned by his father and repeatedly let down by authority figures throughout his childhood. His shadow had learned that people who offer help or guidance will eventually disappoint, betray, or abandon you. So whenever someone got close enough to really impact his success, his shadow would activate defensive strategies to push them away before they could hurt him. Relationship sabotage often looks like becoming suddenly critical of people who are supporting you, finding flaws in their character or motives, or creating tests that are impossible to pass. Your shadow might convince you that successful people are somehow corrupt, or that you need to maintain your independence at all costs. Another common form is what Jung called projection, where you unconsciously attribute your own shadow qualities to others. If your shadow carries rejected anger, you might see others hostile or aggressive when they're actually trying to help. If your shadow carries fears of being manipulative, you might constantly suspect others of trying to manipulate you. Shadow also sabotages relationships through what I call success isolation. This is when achieving success triggers fears of being envied, targeted, or attacked by others. So you preemptively withdraw from relationships to protect yourself. You might stop reaching out to friends, decline invitations, or create emotional distance because your shadow believes that success makes you a target. Jung found that many successful people actually become more isolated as they achieve more, not because success inherently leads to loneliness, but because their shadow fears that others will only want to use them or tear them down. This creates a tragic irony where the success you worked so hard to achieve ends up feeling empty because you've cut yourself off from meaningful connection, professional relationship. Sabotage also shows up as an inability to receive support, mentorship, or collaboration. Your shadow might convince you that asking for help makes you weak, that successful people should be completely self-reliant, or that accepting support means owing someone something you can't repay. Here's how to recognize relationship sabotage in your own patterns. Notice what happens when people offer to help, mentor, or support your success. Do you feel grateful and excited? Or do you immediately start looking for their hidden agenda? Do you find yourself becoming critical or distant with people who believe in your potential? Pay attention to your professional relationships over time. Do you have mentors, collaborators, and supporters who've been in your life for years? Or do you tend to cycle through relationships, always finding reasons why people aren't trustworthy or don't understand you? David's healing process involved gradually learning to stay present and connected, even when his shadow was screaming that people were dangerous. He practiced accepting help without immediately looking for strings attached and slowly built evidence that some people genuinely wanted to support his success without hidden agendas. Shadow. Sign number 4. Perfectionism and the fear of authentic expression. The fourth shadow sign is perfectionism, but not the kind most people think about. This isn't about having high standards or wanting to do quality work. This is shadow-driven perfectionism that's actually a sophisticated form of hiding and self-protection. Jung discovered that many people use perfectionism as a way to avoid the vulnerability of putting their authentic self into the world. If nothing you create is ever quite good enough to share, you never have to risk being judged, criticized, or rejected for who you really are. This type of perfectionism is driven by what Jung called the false self, a carefully constructed persona designed to gain approval and avoid rejection. Your shadow knows that your false self isn't authentic, so it lives in constant terror that if you put yourself out there, people will see through the facade and reject the real you. Let me share Alana's story. She was an incredibly talented writer who had been working on her novel for 8 years. Every time she got close to finishing, she'd decide it wasn't good enough and start over. She'd join writing groups, get amazing feedback, then convince herself that people were just being polite. She had enough material for 5 novels, but had never published a single word. When we explored her shadow, we discovered that Alana had grown up in a family where love was conditional on performance. She learned that she was only valuable when she was achieving, excelling, and making others proud. But she also learned that failure or imperfection led to criticism, disappointment, and emotional withdrawal from her parents. Alana's shadow had created a perfect trap. She needed to achieve and be recognized to feel worthy. But she also couldn't risk putting imperfect work into the world, because that might lead to the criticism and rejection she'd learned to fear in childhood. So perfectionism became her solution. She could feel productive and talented while never actually risking real exposure. Shadow-driven perfectionism often masks a deep fear of authentic expression. Your shadow might convince you that your real thoughts, feelings, or creative expressions aren't valuable or interesting enough to share. It might tell you that you need to be more polished, more professional, more like someone else before you can step into visibility. This type of perfectionism is also fueled by what Jung called comparison addiction. Your shadow constantly measures your internal experience against others' external presentations, always finding yourself lacking. You see other people's finished products and compare them to your rough drafts, never realizing that everyone starts with messy first attempts. Jung found that perfectionist procrastination often intensifies right before major breakthroughs. When you're on the verge of completing something meaningful, your shadow panics about exposure and vulnerability, so it convinces you that you need to perfect it just a little bit more. This can keep you trapped in endless revision cycles that prevent you from ever sharing your gifts with the world. Another form of shadow perfectionism is what I call preparation addiction. This is when you convince yourself you need more training, more credentials, more preparation before you're ready to pursue your goals. Your shadow keeps moving the goalpost because it's not actually about being prepared. It's about avoiding the vulnerability of putting yourself out there. The shadow also uses perfectionism to maintain control and avoid the uncertainty of real engagement with the world. If you never finish and share your work, you never have to deal with the unpredictable responses of other people. You can maintain the fantasy that your work would be perfect and universally loved if only you had more time to polish it. Here's how to recognize shadow perfectionism in your own life. Notice whether your standards serve your goals or sabotage them. Are you using high standards to create better work, or are you using impossible standards to avoid finishing and sharing your work? Pay attention to when perfectionist tendencies intensify. Do they spike right before deadlines, before sharing work with others, or before stepping into greater visibility? This timing often reveals that perfectionism is really about fear rather than quality. Elena's breakthrough came when she committed to sharing imperfect work and discovered that people resonated with her authentic voice more than her polished persona. She published her novel with all its imperfections and found an audience that loved exactly what she'd been afraid to show. Shadow sign number 5. Success, ceiling, and the fear of outgrowing your identity. The fifth and perhaps most subtle shadow sign is what I call the success ceiling, an invisible limit on how much success, wealth, or recognition you allow yourself to achieve. This happens when your shadow believes that exceeding a certain level of success would fundamentally change who you are in dangerous ways. Jung discovered that many people have unconscious identity attachments that limit their growth. Your shadow might be invested in seeing yourself as the underdog, the struggling artist, the humble person who doesn't need much. When success threatens these identity attachments, your shadow will sabotage to maintain what feels like authentic. Selfhood. This is particularly common in people who grew up in families or communities where success was viewed with suspicion, where wealthy or successful people were seen as corrupt or selfish, or where struggling and sacrifice were equated with virtue and authenticity. Let me tell you about James, a gifted therapist who kept his practice small and his fees low despite having a waiting list of potential clients. Every time he considered expanding or raising his rates, he'd feel like he was betraying his values and becoming someone he didn't want to be. He'd been raised to believe that helping people shouldn't be about money, and that truly good people don't focus on material success. When we explored his shadow, we discovered that James had unconscious beliefs that success would make him greedy, selfish, and disconnected from the people he cared about. His shadow was convinced that if he became too successful, he'd lose his compassion, his authenticity, and his connection to his community. James's shadow had created a false choice. He could either be successful or he could be a good person, but not both. This belief system kept him struggling financially while telling himself that his struggle proved his moral superiority. Success ceiling. Sabotage often shows up as mysterious resistance, right when you're about to break through to a new level. You might find yourself losing motivation, getting distracted by other projects, or creating problems that force you to step back from opportunities. The shadow creates success ceilings because it's trying to preserve what it perceives as your core identity. If you've always been the person who helps others, struggles financially, or stays humble and small, your shadow might panic when success threatens to change that identity. It would rather keep you limited but consistent than allow you to grow beyond familiar boundaries. Jung found that success ceilings are often intergenerational patterns passed down through families. If your parents struggled financially, your shadow might feel like financial success would be a betrayal of your family's experience. If your community values struggle and sacrifice, your shadow might fear that success would lead to rejection and exile from your tribe. Another common success ceiling is the fear of responsibility and visibility that comes with higher levels of achievement. Your shadow might convince you that you're not ready for the pressure, scrutiny, or expectations that come with greater success. It might tell you that you're safer staying small, where you can control your environment and avoid challenging situations. Shadow also creates success ceilings through what Jung called guilt complexes around deserving and receiving. Your shadow might convince you that there are others more deserving, that success is somehow selfish when others are struggling, or that you should give away your achievements to prove you're still a good person. Here's how to recognize success ceilings in your own life. Notice if there's a level of income, recognition, or achievement that you approach but never quite reach. Pay attention to what happens when opportunities arise that would take you beyond your usual limits. Do you feel excited and ready, or do you feel anxious and resistant? Examine your beliefs about successful people. Do you have unconscious judgments about wealth, achievement, or recognition that might be limiting your own growth? Do you worry that success would change you in ways you wouldn't like? James's transformation happened when he realized he could expand his impact and income while maintaining his values and compassion. He gradually raised his fees and expanded his practice, using the additional resources to provide more pro bono work and reach people he couldn't have helped when he was struggling financially. Integration. Working with your shadow for success now that you understand these 5 shadow signs. The question becomes, how do you work with your shadow instead of being sabotaged by it? Jung's approach to shadow work isn't about eliminating or conquering your shadow. It's about acknowledging, understanding, and integrating these rejected parts of yourself so they can become allies in your success rather than obstacles. The first step is what Jung called shadow recognition, becoming aware of when your shadow is operating. This requires developing what he called the observing self, a part of your consciousness that can witness your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without being completely identified with them. Start paying attention to patterns around your goals and achievements. When do you feel resistance? When do you sabotage? When do you feel most afraid of success or visibility? These moments are often your shadow trying to protect you from perceived dangers. The second step is what Jung called dialogue with the shadow. Instead of fighting against these protective impulses, try approaching them with curiosity and compassion. Ask your shadow what it's trying to protect you from. What does it fear will happen if you succeed? What did it learn in childhood that made these protective strategies necessary? Remember that your shadow developed these patterns when you were young and vulnerable, and they probably served an important protective function at the time. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that learned to keep you safe in whatever environment you grew up in. The third step is what Jung called conscious choice. Once you understand what your shadow fears and why it's trying to protect you, you can make conscious choices about how to move forward. You can acknowledge your shadow's concerns while also choosing to act in alignment with your conscious goals. This might involve taking smaller steps to build trust with your shadow, creating safety nets that address its concerns, or gradually exposing yourself to the things it fears in manageable doses. The goal isn't to ignore or override your shadow, but to create a partnership between your conscious goals and your unconscious protective mechanisms. Jung found that people who successfully integrated their shadow often became more powerful, creative, and authentic than they'd ever been before. When you stop fighting against parts of yourself and start working with your whole psyche, you gain access to energy and creativity that was previously trapped in internal conflict. The shadow also holds what Jung called golden shadow, positive qualities that you rejected or disowned, often because they weren't acceptable in your family or community. As you work with your shadow, you might discover talents, strengths, or aspects of personality that you've been suppressing. Remember that. Shadow work is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. Your shadow will continue to surface, especially as you grow and face new challenges. But once you understand how to recognize and work with these patterns, you can use them as information and guidance rather than allowing them to sabotage your success. The most successful people I work with aren't those who've eliminated their shadow. They're those who've learned to dance with it, to honor its protective wisdom while also pursuing their conscious goals with courage and determination. Your shadow isn't something to be ashamed of or conquered. It's a part of your psyche that holds important information about your fears, your history, and your deepest needs for safety and belonging. When you learn to work with your shadow instead of against it, you don't just achieve more success. You achieve success that feels authentic, sustainable, and aligned with who you really are. The path forward isn't about becoming perfect or eliminating your fears. It's about becoming whole, integrating all parts of yourself so you can show up authentically while still honoring the protective wisdom your shadow has developed over the years. So tonight, before you go to sleep, try this. Thank your shadow for all the ways it's tried to protect you. Acknowledge that its concerns come from love and a desire to keep you safe. Then gently let it know that you're strong enough now to handle both success and whatever challenges might come with it. Your shadow has been working over time to keep you safe, but it's time to let it know that you're ready for the next level of your life. When your shadow becomes your ally instead of your saboteur, there's no limit to what you can achieve.